Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, wherever you happen to be, and welcome to the UAE Business Council's webinar on renewable and alternative energies. We're going to be talking about the opportunities and challenges for collaboration and investment into hydrogen between the UAE. It's something that is very close to my heart and my line of work. I'm Hadley Gamble, CNBC Senior International Correspondent and Anchor in Abu Dhabi. So a lot of excitement on our end for talking about renewables. I want to go ahead and kick off by introducing our panelists today. His Excellency, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the UAE's Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology, as well as the UAE's Special Envoy for Climate Change. He's also the chairman of Masdar. So a lot of things in his bio that we'll get to a bit later in this morning's program. The Honorable Malcolm Turnbull, he is, of course, the former Australian Prime Minister. It's great to have you. And Mr. Mohammed Jamil Al Ramehi, he's the CEO of Masdar, as well as David Scott, the founder and president of Invest DG. Gentlemen, welcome. I want to kick off by asking His Excellency, Badr Al Alama, he is the co-chair of the Australia UAE Business Forum, to walk us through what kind of developments that we're seeing right now, the challenges potentially to kicking this off, but as well as the opportunities. Your Excellency, please take the floor.
Thank you, Hadley. Let me start off by saying with the launch of the Australia UAE Business Council in November of last year, both Mr. Pine and I are committed to deepening and expanding the bilateral trade. Webinars such as the one that we are on at the moment raise awareness on strategies, connects companies on both sides, and promotes business opportunities. As two very progressive and forward-thinking countries, we have placed renewable and alternative energy at the heart of our economic strategies. Specifically about the UAE, we have taken a leadership role to promote clean energy. Back in 2006, the UAE has established Masdar City. We are quite honored and quite proud to have the CEO of Masdar with us today, Mohammed Ramehi. Masdar is a dedicated hub for research and innovation to develop renewable energy and alternative technologies for green tech. Abu Dhabi is also the home to IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, which was set up in 2009. This is the first intergovernmental organization that has had its headquarters in the Middle East. And more recently, Mubadala, ADNOC, and ADQ, the three largest players in the Abu Dhabi economy, have formed a hydrogen alliance to develop a roadmap that will accelerate the use and adoption of hydrogen across sectors such as utilities, mobility, and industry. Some of the more other exciting initiatives that are happening across the UAE, it's important that we mention the collaboration between the Dubai Electricity Water Authority and the Emirates Global Aluminum that are working together to produce aluminum that is manufactured using solar energy. There's a collaboration that is ongoing between Masdar, Siemens, Lufthansa, Ittihad, Khalifa University, and Maribuni to develop green fuels for mobility. And lastly, I'd like to mention the establishment of the Mohammed bin Rashid Solar Park, which will transform Dubai by having 75% of Dubai's total power from clean energy by 2050. Hadley, you know that I'm a big champion as well of fourth industrial revolution technologies, and the sector itself has leveraged a lot of 4IR technologies to unlock greater value. Energy as a service, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, batteries, and blockchains are all transforming the business models and pushing for the decarbonization of industry. So this is a very, very big development that's taking place. So with this unprecedented pace of innovation and emphasis on clean energy, I'm very proud to announce the formation of the Working Group on Renewables and Alternative Energy. This working group will promote opportunities for investment and co-development, enhance knowledge exchange on research and policies, and reinforce our strategic partnership so that our two great nations can lead the way on clean energy, driving impact, sustainability, and prosperity globally. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for that. I want to go ahead and ask the Honorable Chris Pine to walk us through his thoughts on this one as well.
Well, thank you very much, Hadley, and can I thank you for hosting and moderating today's webinar on renewables and alternative energies. And I'd like to recognize particularly my co-chair in the Australia United Arab Emirates Business Council, Badr Al Olama, and the former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, with whom, of course, I served in his cabinet and alongside him in the cabinet. And I'm delighted that he's decided to give us some time on this very important subject. I'd also like to thank Mohammed Jamil Al-Ramahi for joining us from Mazda as its CEO, and David Scott as the president of Invest DG, who's also, of course, a former director of the National Security Council of the United States government, covering North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. And we'll soon hear a recorded message from the Minister for Industry from the UAE. So it's a bit of a star-studded cast, as we say in Australia, and it's a very important subject. In fact, the working group on renewables and alternative energies is the first working group of the Aus-UABC, and I'm very pleased that's the case, because for both the UAE and Australia, it's a really important priority and should be a priority around the world. And we have tremendous well springs of expertise in those areas that we can offer the world. And in fact, the Turnbull government was one of the leaders in the world around renewables and alternative energies. And I'm sure Malcolm will talk a bit about that. And the UAE is doing the same through the leadership of MBZ in your country. Just very quickly on the Australia UAE Business Council, we are a corporate-based organisation, so we don't have individual membership. And we now have, only in a very short space of time, over 20 corporate members on both sides of the Indian Ocean. So it's about a half-half membership, which is very exciting. And we're lucky to have the full buy-in of both the Emirati government and the Australian government. In fact, we were launched by Prime Minister Morrison here in November in Sydney. And if it hadn't been for the pandemic, I had no doubt we would have been back and forth between the Emirates and Australia in that time. But we're hopeful of leading a business delegation to the Emirates for the Expo, and particularly the manufacturing conference in late November this year, if we're allowed to travel from Australia, which is a bit of a fortress at the moment through the pandemic. The working group will be built around those people who are members of the council who self-nominate to be actively involved. And from that group, Badr and I will choose 2 co-chairs, and they will effectively run the working group to come up in about 3 to 4 months with the proposal about how the Emirates and Australia could cooperate on a particular project or a range of projects or an area of policy that can make a significant difference in driving our economies and our reliance on renewables rather than on other fossil fuel types of energy. So at the end of the, in fact, I can announce now, if you like, that we have set up on the website a ausuebc.com/working-group website registration for those people who are interested in being members of the working group. Anyone who wishes to can register to be a part of the working group, and members, of course, will have precedence and priority over their greater say over its direction, led by the co-chairs, but we'll be encouraging anyone who wishes to take part in its deliberations as long as they register through our AusUABC website. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to hearing the discussion.
Great stuff with that, Chris. And it's something obviously that CNBC we've been very focused on as well. Earlier this year, we had the chance to speak in an exclusive interview with John Kerry in his role as the climate change czar, if you will, from the United States. Quite a departure, as we all know, from the last 4 years of former President Donald Trump, and a very new direction for the United States, and also one in which his counterpart, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, was able to kick that off right here in the UAE, and frankly, lead the way for all the Gulf Arab countries on this kind of initiative. I want to go ahead and hand it over now to a video message that Dr. Sultan has left for us.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first to send the best wishes of the United Arab Emirates and its leadership to the Commonwealth of Australia. May I also thank the UAE Australia Business Council for inviting me to today's webinar on the opportunities for growth in the renewable and alternative energy space. Australia and the UAE may be thousands of miles apart, but we have developed very close economic, political, and cultural ties in a short amount of time, so that today the UAE represents Australia's #1 trading partner in the Middle East. The UAE and Australia already enjoy close trade relations across a number of industrial sectors, including energy, infrastructure, agribusiness, and healthcare. And as we continue to diversify our economy, particularly in technology-enabled sectors, let me extend an open invitation to Australian businesses to explore opportunities alongside us. One area that makes perfect sense for us to deepen cooperation is clean technology, renewable, and alternative energies. Ladies and gentlemen, both our countries have taken advantage of our access to sunshine to capitalize on the enormous potential of renewable energy as an economic opportunity that also addresses a global need. And let me congratulate Australia for achieving a significant milestone last year, with more than a quarter of the country's total electricity generation coming from renewable sources for the first time. In the UAE, we have seen a similar growth trajectory. We began our investments in the renewable energy space some 15 years ago, placing a bet on nascent technologies that have made sound business sense over time. Today, we operate 3 of the largest and lowest cost solar plants in the world, and we are on track to source 50% of our energy needs from clean technologies by 2050. The investment case for renewable and alternative energies has never been stronger, and it is clear that both Australia and the UAE see the potential to do more. In fact, I am pleased that one of our most active renewable energy investors, Masdar, has recently partnered with Australia's Tribe Group on a waste-to-energy project that will divert 325,000 tons of waste from landfill and turn it into clean, steam-powered electricity. This is just one project that makes a great foundation of collaboration that we can build and should continue building on. Let us expand our existing partnership through Masdar to capitalize on opportunities in wind and solar power. And let's leverage our broader relationship to explore new energies, such as hydrogen. While hydrogen as a zero-carbon alternative fuel is still at its infancy, over time, it could be a game changer within the energy mix. Already, at the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, we produce about 300,000 tons of hydrogen a year as part of our current industrial processes. Alongside our existing infrastructure, we believe ADNOC can become a major player in the developing blue hydrogen market. In addition, while we are prioritizing blue hydrogen at ADNOC, we are also exploring the potential of green hydrogen through the Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance, which we recently established with Masdar and other key domestic stakeholders. One of the keys to developing the hydrogen economy of the future will be aligning supply and demand. So we are working with existing and new partners around the world to identify markets, map out value chains, and develop a roadmap to create a hydrogen ecosystem to serve both the UAE and the global marketplace. Ladies and gentlemen, as Australia's demand for energy grows, the UAE is willing and able to be a true and reliable partner for your energy needs across the entire conventional, renewable, and alternative value chain. Let us also take advantage of the new technologies of the 4th industrial age to expand our relationship across every traditional and emerging industrial sector. I look forward to a productive discussion and to continuing to deepen the UAE's partnership with Australia at every level. Thank you.
That was His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber. What's really fascinating is Dr. Sultan has been talking to CNBC as the head of ADNOC, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, for years now, and the shift that we've seen not just here in the UAE but across the Gulf Arab countries So understanding renewables, focusing on renewables in terms of the business model is quite fascinating. We're also seeing that, of course, with the heads of the international oil companies as well. I want to kick off now with His Excellency, the former Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. Sir, it's fabulous to have you joining us this morning. Thank you. One of the things that I think that people would be most interested to hear from you on would be not just the policy angle for Australia, but also as a former investment banker. What are the opportunities for business? What are the opportunities to make money, as well as, frankly, change the global energy dynamic that you see?
Well, I think the clean energy revolution is an extraordinary one. You know, we've been used to technological revolutions in the telecom sector, and I guess we see that more vividly because we hold one of the products of that in our hand, sometimes ceaselessly, addicted as we are to our smartphones. But electricity and energy are changing just as rapidly. You know, we are moving away from fossil fuels to renewable sources of energy, in particular solar and wind. And of course, the topography of energy networks, energy grids has changed dramatically. You know, we're moving from having a few centralized, large, generally thermal, that's to say burning coal or gas fired power stations, to a much more distributed grid. You know, in Australia, nearly 30% of households have solar panels on their roof. So you know, you basically have got millions of generators in Australia, but even at an industrial stage, an industrial level, you know, that's to say 100 megawatts and bigger, it's a very, very distributed, very different type of grid. Let me make a couple of observations that I think, you know, are particularly pertinent to the opportunities here. The first thing is that as opposed to being more expensive than, you know, fossil fuel derived energy, renewables are now cheaper. And I mean, you're seeing that in the Gulf, where, you know, solar contracts are being written for $10 a megawatt hour. And, you know, that is way below any coal-fired power station can generate electricity for, let alone a new coal-fired station. So the other point I'd note is that renewables are zero marginal cost generators. And so, you know, if the 6 of us on the screen here have all got a 250 megawatt solar farm, and we might have all, for various reasons, have paid different amounts to build it. You know, the land might have been more expensive, or, you know, David did a better job on this contract with the solar panels, and His Excellency Mohammed Jamil Al Ramahi had by far the best team to construct it, and so got it done cheaper. You know, but we might all have different capital costs, which means we'll have our long-term cost of electricity, will each of them be different. But because we're a zero marginal cost generator, we will hit the bid at whatever price we can get. So if we can get $1 a megawatt hour as opposed to nothing, we'll take it because we have no marginal cost of generation. So that's a very important point, which we may return to. So I see this is a transition that's happening. It's inevitable. The Gulf and, you know, the Arabian Peninsula, of course, are very, very. A lot of people would say, well, this is really bad. You know, you guys are in oil and gas, and that's going to go out of fashion. Well, the reality is you've got an extraordinary amount of solar radiation resources too. So there is no reason why the clean energy superpowers cannot be in your part of the world, or indeed in our part of the world. Because what you need actually is for solar, you need lots of sun, and you need low-cost real estate, and you need the ability to assemble these solar farms rapidly and economically. I mean, I'll give you an example of the kind of things that are happening in Australia. There's a company I'm an investor in. I mean, I'm out of politics. I'm sort of back in the venture capital business, which is what I used to do before I went crazy and got into Parliament. But one of the companies we're invested in is a company called 5B, B for, Bob, and it has in effect, a prefabricated rollout solar farm. So literally they pull up, I think Mohammed is nodding, I think he's familiar with the Maverick product. They roll up with containers, lower one side, and a little tractor just literally pulls out the solar array like a concertina. So it's a dramatic reduction in the cost. And, so this is obviously for large, this is not to put on your roof, I might add. It'd be, you'd have to have a very big roof to make it work. But these are the kinds of clever tweaks and innovations that are going to reduce the cost. Let me raise, just in conclusion, one big concern I have, and that is this. I don't think we, and this is the whole world, by and large, is doing enough for long duration storage. We're spending money on batteries, and that's terrific, and they're getting more efficient, but we're not building enough long duration storage. Now, in Australia, the best opportunity for that is pumped storage, as it is in most places. One of the big projects that I started as PM, as Christopher's support, of course, was Snowy Hydro 2.0, which is the largest pumped hydro scheme in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, that's being constructed as we speak. But these type of big civil engineering projects take quite a long time to build. They're going to be very important to basically keep the lights on when the sun is down and the wind's not blowing. But there is a temporal asymmetry that we have to be very alert to. It's something I've been speaking with John Kerry about, and Boris Johnson and other leaders, because it really should be a very high priority at the COP. Because you can build a solar farm. I mean, Mazda would probably be able to build a new one in a few months. They don't take a long time to build, but anything to do with civil works, with concrete, steel, anything to do with water in particular is hugely time consuming. Sometimes the permitting alone can take years. So we have to get cracking and think ahead. So it's not all, roses and sweet dreams in terms of the energy transition. There are some difficult questions that have to be addressed, and one of them is long duration storage. So I hope, that's an area that we can collaborate on, and certainly support its prioritization in the global discussion about the transition. Thank you.
It feels like there might not be any better person really to talk about this and then the challenges to making this kind of carbon-free, carbon-neutral transition than the CEO of Masdar. I want to bring in His Excellency Mohammed Jamil Al-Rumehi. It's great to see you again. It's been a while, even virtually. Mohammed, when you think about this a bit more broadly, walk us through where you see the opportunities and the challenges here as well.
Thank you, Hadley. Good afternoon and good morning to my fellow participant and of course our audience. First off, I would like to thank the Australia UAE Business Council for this invite and the opportunity. I really appreciate the time to explain some of what we are doing in the green energy space here at the United Arab Emirates, which we consider home, of course, in Australia and around the world. And a very important subject, again, our current work on green hydrogen. It has mentioned before, but maybe just for the sake of the audience, we are also known as Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, or Masdar. We were created in 2006 with a mandate to advance the development and adoption of clean energy solution and sustainable urban development as a way to address sustainability challenges on a local level, regionally, and of course, at a global scale. We seek opportunities that will deliver sustainability impact as well as financial returns to our parent company, Mubadala Investment Company. And at the same time, we are diversifying the UAE's economy and bringing new geographies and sectors into Mubadala's portfolio. Today, we are in fact one of the world's fastest growing renewable energy companies with a footprint across more than 30 countries and an investment portfolio covering solar, wind, waste to energy, electric mobility, energy storage, green hydrogen research, and of course, sustainable urban development. We have more than doubled the capacity of our renewable energy portfolio within the last 2 years alone, investing or committing to invest in projects with a combined value of $20 billion and a generation capacity close to 11 gigawatt with various business partners. Of course, in Australia, our biggest projects to date have been in waste to energy, with 2 large projects signed in 2020 alone. However, and this is very important to my heart and close to us as Masdar, is our history with Australia dates back further. We've actually been working closely with Australian Antarctic Division, AAD, for a number of years now. In early 2019, we helped install the first solar panel system at an Australian Antarctic station. This supplies 30 kilowatt of electricity power to the Casey Research Station in the Windmill Islands, just outside the Antarctic Circle, reducing resilience on diesel. Other cooperation between Masdar and the AAD includes sponsoring a Khalifa University research project to improve the monitoring of changes in the Antarctic sea ice, enabling young Emirati professionals from here, the United Arab Emirates, to visit the Casey as entrance and building an overall energy management system for the base. I'm really proud of such collaboration, as they show not just our technical expertise and our investment professional way of conducting business, but also, which is very important, our commitment to demonstrating that clean energy can be a solution even in the most remote parts of our planet. Our work is especially important in Antarctica, a unique, fragile environment that is an indicator for our planet's overall well-being, but which is witnessing some of the most rapid warming on Earth. Over the past 50 years, the Antarctic Peninsula warmed almost 3 degrees centigrade, significantly higher than the global average of just under 1 degree. The clean energy sector of Australia is one of we've been looking at for some time. We believe that the country has immense potential for various clean energy solutions, from renewable to green hydrogen, and it offers and investors the characteristics we look for: the ease of doing business, the regulatory stability, an open market, and others. As a global clean energy company, we cannot ignore Australia. We are well aware that Australia is positioning itself as key future exporter of green hydrogen. And this is something we are watching very closely. Australia is already partnering with like-minded countries that see the potential of green hydrogen as a fuel of the future. Our country, the United Arab Emirates, too, through Masdar, is a natural partner for Australia in establishing the commercial viability of hydrogen in all its colors and across the value chain. At Masdar, we were looking at hydrogen production and power generation as far back as 2008. In fact, we were a little too far ahead of the curve. We feel now is the time to really accelerate investment into this technology. At Masdar, we are already building a demonstrative plant that will show the potential viability of green hydrogen, but this is going to be a capital-intensive industry. Green hydrogen is still expensive to produce, so the faster we can achieve a commercial critical mass, the better. As we saw with solar and wind, a small push from regulators allowed these technologies to scale, reducing cost by over 90% in the past decade. We must identify where those nudges and pushes will be most effective in developing hydrogen as a commercial fuel. We see clear synergies with what you are doing in Australia. And our own business model is based on forging partnerships along the whole value chain where Masdar can contribute with its best-in-class green energy experience. Hydrogen truly has the potential to change the world, and we look forward to working with innovatives and in Australia and around the world in developing the fuel of the future. Thank you, Adi.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I want to bring in now David Scott. He's the founder and president of InvestDG. And David, when you think about this with regards to your experience, particularly in the Arabian Gulf, the GCC countries, you know, back in 2009, I remember covering as one of my first events. At that time, I was with CNN, and that was a climate change summit in Abu Dhabi, and the entire area was covered with you know, investables, companies from Europe, patents. And I just kept thinking, you know, not only is the UAE going to own the energy of now, they're going to own the future energy as well, and really have an insight into how we proceed. And that's certainly been the case up to this point. Walk us through what you see as the most interesting investables, as well as what this all looks like from a national and global security perspective.
Good. Well, Hadley, thanks very much. And Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here this evening. I know we're pushing a little bit on our time, a little bit of the schedule, so I'll keep my comments relatively brief. But I thought I would share a slightly different perspective, thinking about energy transition and focusing maybe on the industrial sector specifically, particularly given the fact that the business groups tend to include corporates that are involved essentially in making things. And so maybe as a first idea I'd like to share is, you know, just the concept that the industrial sector is really one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions, larger than transportation, almost twice as large as the transportation sector, and larger than agriculture and other sectors. In fact, it accounts for about 29% of greenhouse gas emissions. And when you look at how the world's been dealing with climate change and energy transition, we've been very focused on transportation and also on the utility sector, which are very important given their size, but also the ease of mitigating the challenges. And we've seen, of course, the electrification of the transportation system. That's caused, you know, and we have a lot of optimism now about the ability to remove greenhouse gases from the transportation sector. And in the utility sector, as discussed by several of the panelists already, we've had a tremendous boom in renewable energies, solar, wind, and alternative energies. You know, I'm quite involved in the nuclear energy as well, and that's something that's also being embraced in the UAE as an example. But now, as we make progress in those sectors, I think attention is going to increasingly focus on the industrial sector, and specifically on the climate friendliness of products. And I think you actually see that, you know, the UAE has some examples of that. You know, recently, the announcement, both His Excellency Sultan and also Mohammed mentioned the arrangements that have been made with Emirates Global Aluminum to produce their brand, what's called Celestial Aluminum, which is solar-based aluminum. So aluminum that's produced with low or no carbon. You also have seen this in other places in the world. In Sweden, you have SSAB, it's a steel maker that's making what's called eco steel, which is using hydroelectric and hydrogen as a way to produce steel. And so you're starting to see the outlines, I believe, of not just an interest in having clean energy sources, but also having clean products. And so the inputs, whether it's steel or commodities or components, and I think that's going to be the focus going forward in the future, will be not just on sectors, saying that the utility sector or the industrial sector are clean, but, you know, even down to brands and even down to products, people will start to think about this. And so maybe I, you know, put this sometimes as a sort of personal experience. Imagine if you went to the supermarket and you were presented with an option. You're going to buy something simple like a tube of toothpaste, and you had one tube that, you know, on the cover said that it was a greenhouse gas free product, you know, versus another, presumably that's not. And then ask yourself, would you be more inclined to buy that product that is greenhouse gas emissions free? Maybe, and you might even be prepared to pay more for it, some premium to have that product. And I think that that's going to be the future of product lines, not just in terms of making sure that our operations are, you know, climate friendly, but actually that the end products are climate friendly, and that we'll be able to demonstrate that. And I think that has an implication when we talk about, the hydrogen sector, which is the focus of tonight's discussion. And I think it really says, as we think about hydrogen, particularly as part of energy transition, and particularly as a source of energy to replace greenhouse gas emitting fossil fuels or other sources of energy, then I think it really tells us that, really only green, perhaps, turquoise, blue, and pink hydrogen, which are all forms of hydrogen that don't result in uncaptured greenhouse gases, are really the only future going forward. And I think that's, some of what both Australia and the UAE need to think about, particularly given the fact that there's still a significant reliance on coal in Australia and a significant reliance on natural gas in the UAE. And I think that suggests a trade strategy, which is to give preferential access to new renewable sources and low carbon and no carbon sources of energy to the industrial sector, particularly for products like hydrogen that are going to be very sensitive to their climate credentials as they go forward. And I think this also sets up an interesting opportunity for products that, fast movers, whether it's in the UAE or Australia, that adopt products that can demonstrate a clean supply chain, not just clean operations, will have an advantage in the market. And I think that's one of the places that we can really focus our attention in order to be able to move forward with the adoption of hydrogen, and potentially for certain products to take a first mover advantage and maybe even displace some of the legacy and incumbent products in various sectors.
We're actually running on a good tight schedule, so I think we're going to be able to go to audience questions for a little bit longer than we initially anticipated. I just want to remind the audience that it's really easy to submit your questions. If you go to the side of your screen, there's a Q&A function. So please feel free to go ahead and start submitting things now. But I want to acknowledge that we've got some great folks in the audience, as well as the UAE Ambassador to Australia, His Excellency Abdullah Al Sabusi. It's great to have you, sir, and thank you so much for joining all of us to talk about this today. The first question is from Stephen Panizza. He is the head of renewable energy at Federation Asset Management. We may be able to get him up now if he's able to unmute.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Apologies for that. Good morning, Your Excellencies. I'm responsible for a fund called the Sustainable Australian Real Assets Fund, the only pure play sustainability fund in Australia. And whilst we have the largest portfolio of wind developments in Australia, it seems that all investors want to talk about at the moment is hydrogen. And whilst the industrial scale production of hydrogen, is uneconomic for energy storage, at least at this stage. The question I have is, how does private capital play its part in the development of hydrogen at this very early stage?
Who would like to take that question? Prime Minister?
Yeah, thank you. Well, look, just by way of disclosure, I'm the chairman of Australian Fortescue Future Industries, which is Andrew Forrest's companies, Fortescue Metals Group, FMG, one of the big three Australian iron ore miners, his green hydrogen play. And Andrew wants to be the world's largest producer of green hydrogen, which is a bold goal, but one that he's putting a lot of resources and effort into. Look, in terms of hydrogen, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. The first thing is that to make green hydrogen, and I just say, with respect to what has been said earlier, I'm skeptical about any color of hydrogen other than green. And I say that because I'm very skeptical of carbon capture and storage. I'm old enough to remember when people thought carbon capture and storage would work and would be economical. And billions of dollars were diverted into it. Sincerely, but the truth is, other than in very specialized circumstances, it has not proved economic, where it's used for enhanced oil recovery and so forth. So I'm very skeptical about blue hydrogen and so-called clean hydrogen. I think the only hydrogen that we should be focused on, and I suspect customers will be focused on, will be that which is produced by electrolyzing water. Now that requires a couple of things. It requires very cheap electricity. So we're well on the way to achieving that. We have to industrialize electrolyzers. And this is an area that I think would be worth looking at from a fund manager's point of view, Stephen. Electrolyzers as a piece of equipment have not had anything approaching the sort of industrialization, mass production experience that just about everything else has, photovoltaic modules, for example. And they're still, it's almost a bespoke industry. And there's hardly any green hydrogen being made in the world today. It's a tiny amount. So that is, I think there's finding the companies with the right technology and the capacity to scale them, I think could be a very useful area. The other issue, of course, with hydrogen is that it's about as eighth as dense as methane. And so moving it around is quite difficult, whether it's in a pipeline, moving it around at atmospheric pressures is very difficult because of that. And to freeze it, you have to get down to about 270 degrees minus degrees in the Celsius scale. So you've really got to be able to be using the hydrogen, turning it into something at the place you make it. Now, I think a very big opportunity, which would be extraordinarily suitable for the Gulf because of its position as a shipping centre, is green ammonia. If you turn your hydrogen,
yes,
combine it with nitrogen into green ammonia, that can become a fuel. Now, if you could replace bunker, the dirt, the least clean oil, crude oil effectively that's used in ships with ammonia, that would make an enormous difference from an emissions point of view, and of course be a very attractive alternative. So I think as I say, cheap energy, more efficient electrolyzers, and geography, location are going to be the key factors. And that's where I think the opportunities will be.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
David, did you want to weigh in on that one as well?
Yeah, could I add something onto that too? I think that's a really interesting question. How can private capital help? And so hydrogen, is now where battery technology was, where solar technology was at their infancy. And I think if we kind of look at the path of those energy sources, it gives us some hint about how this has to work. Now, His Excellency Mohammed mentioned earlier, the need for government to provide some help in some areas through regulation. I think also government programs that provide matching funding for the private sector in R&D are very important in bending the cost curve down. And then, the private sector has to be active and be seeking the VC opportunities, the angel investing opportunities that represent the innovative ways of improving the technology. I mean, today, green hydrogen is, somewhere between, 2 or 4 times more expensive than other forms of hydrogen. And that's a big gap that we have to get over in order to make it the scalable choice of industry. And so, but I think private sector can play a role, I think, advocating with government, I think making available, their funds in matching programs. And then, like I said, really just the work of going and looking at the inventors and the innovators in the way that private sector can and that government cannot, to identify those innovations that have the most potential is a way that the private sector can accomplish with green hydrogen, and I'm going to just differ here with the Honorable former Prime Minister here, pink hydrogen or the other forms of hydrogen if the economics of storage or production of carbon as a component rather than CO2 could be mastered. Then I think that's a place where the private sector can play, and where governments are notoriously terrible at selecting technology choices.
Thank you very much.
This question is for, I think, His Excellency Mohammed Al-Ramehi. This is from the audience, essentially saying, while the MENA region, especially the UAE, are of course developing their own green hydrogen assets in the supply chain, do you think that the sovereign wealth funds and energy companies like Masdar, will they be open to this kind of investment going forward? And what can we potentially see from them in these green hydrogen projects?
Yes, I mean, obviously, in my earlier remarks, I've highlighted what we are doing on hydrogen. And hydrogen has been always part of our strategy since the early days of Masdar, which goes back to almost 14 years ago. We've looked and assessed the possibility of building the largest hydrogen power station in the world. And we moved today into something what we call green hydrogen generation, to potentially that can be used in transportation and specifically into the aviation sector through moving green hydrogen into synthetic fuels. There is a lot of potential solution using green hydrogen, and I absolutely support the notion that green hydrogen is the future. And I would say, for the record, today, David, I've learned something new: pink hydrogen. I've known gray, blue, and green, but pink, I've never heard about it before. So thank you, David, for this. So, but yes, so there is a huge potential. But like Malcolm has highlighted earlier, I mean, there are a lot of challenges, and we're still at an early stage. And these challenges are coming from two main matters. One, transportation. Two, storage. It's very difficult today to store hydrogen. It's very difficult to transport hydrogen. Okay, and of course, it's today we are still, I would say, not competitive to generate hydrogen from green energy sources. Do we have all the necessary ingredients? The answer is yes. We need to scale up the production of green hydrogen, and scaling it up comes from what Mr. Malcolm has highlighted through electrolyzers. Electrolyzers are available, technology is there, but it is still expensive. And to be honest, it's still not 100% reliable. So we need to further invest into what we call electrolyzer and what we call at Masdar hydrolyzers. That's one matter. The other issue is we need to put huge amount of research and development on storage and transportation. And I would like to say to Australia, well done for attracting a lot of development and pilot project and research into transportation and storage. Actually, Australia was one of the first countries in the world to develop pilot projects with like-minded countries, without mentioning these countries, pilot project on storage and transportation. And that's the name of the game of the future. Okay, but the potential is huge, and yes, Masdar will be investing in green hydrogen.
Just a quick question in addition to that, Your Excellency, when we think about what there could potentially be in terms of the partnerships, how do you see those breaking down in terms of, were we talking about joint ventures, were we talking about private equity? What does it look like to you if Masdar, for example, is planning to invest in Australia's green energy sector? What kind of partnerships do you think?
So Adli, private equity is clear. Private equity needs to go to the technology. It means electrolyzer, storage, potential solution for hydrogen, other potential sub-products of hydrogen. Private equity needs to go there. We are not a private equity play, so we are not going to go there. What we are doing is we are bringing like-minded potential technology players. For example, in Abu Dhabi, we brought in Siemens, okay, as our technology partners. We also brought in, like my dear friend Badr mentioned earlier, alongside Siemens, we brought in Morobini, we brought on Total as well. We told them, listen, guys, we are doing this project, okay? And this project, ultimately, it's a green hydrogen to do what? To demonstrate the technical aspect of green hydrogen into synthetic fuels that is going to be used in the aviation sector. And then we went to Etihad Airlines and Lufthansa and said, guys, if you want to join us in this journey, we can provide you with potentially green, clean energy fuel for the aviation sector, which is, by the way, one of, it's the aviation sector and transportation, either be it on water or on land, is still problematic when it comes to decarbonization. When we look at mobility, scooters and cars, we say no problem, because we have electric solution that is currently commercially viable and competitive, okay? But when we look at large-scale transportation, we are still at an early stage of decarbonization. One of the potential solutions to decarbonization, the aviation sector, is through green hydrogen, but not the hydrogen itself, rather than synthetic fuels, a sub-product of green hydrogen solution, okay? That can be used with the existing infrastructure and technologies that we have in that sector. If we can achieve the technical success of that project, if we can achieve the commercial viability of this project, the world can easily change, and the aviation sector and the transport sector can be decarbonized effectively, efficiently, and successfully.
We have a live audience question from Craig Valenzuela. He's with QIC in Brisbane. He's the Managing Director for Global Business Development and Strategic Partnerships. Craig?
Thanks, Hadley. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So QIC is a large infrastructure manager that invests and manages solar, wind, and hydrogen-related assets. My question to whoever would like to answer it is, in addition to Christopher's working groups he noticed at the start, is there more that Australian infrastructure managers and firms can do to ensure that firms and corporations, institutional investors in the UAE are aware of these skills and expertise in Australia?
Who would like to take that question? David or Chris?
I'll volunteer just a thought. Being somebody who has a company that operates, from the U.S. and into the region, what I can say is there's really, and it's been very difficult, of course, because of COVID, but there's really no replacement for actually being in the region, right? Coming and meeting with people. I mean, one of the great things in the UAE, I think you'll find, is that, all of the players that are in the sustainability space are eminently approachable. But I think companies that have that expertise, right, should certainly be coming to the region, should be doing road shows, they should be introducing their skills, because, the tyranny of distance sometimes means that, the region doesn't have a full appreciation for the tremendous technical expertise that exists in Australia. And I think that that's something that, can only be bridged by people coming across. And I'm sure, of course, that the institutions like the Australian Embassy and others would cooperate and do their part as well. But I think, being there and coming and seeing what the opportunities are and introducing your capabilities, that's really, I think, important.
Mohammed?
Yes, ma'am.
What are your thoughts on that one?
I want to say that perhaps I missed the question. Maybe I did not understand what was the question. Maybe if you can.
Craig, do you want to weigh in?
Absolutely. So I think my point is, and David, thank you for your comments around COVID. I think that was part of my thinking, is that we can't get there anymore. So if we've got this knowledge and skills that exist around hydrogen and solar and production, and also assets that rely on those green energy sources, is there more that Australian institutions can do to effectively allow the region to understand the skills and expertise and they can access from Australian corporations?
Yes, there's a lot to do, to be honest. I mean, let's start with this extraordinary initiative by both government to create the UAE Australian Business Council. So well done, guys. That's, I think, a fantastic step forward to building these bridges. Okay, but again, through these bridges, you have these subcommittees, but then you have direct access. Today, you are, as you have highlighted, you have a humongous amount of knowledge and experience in both the renewable energy sector and potentially hydrogen. And let's say you want to reach out. I mean, you can directly reach out to the CEO of Masdar. I mean, now Masdar is very active in the hydrogen. Obviously, there are other entities within the UAE are also active in hydrogen. For example, in Dubai, there are few active players in hydrogen. But in the UAE, our culture is very simple. We can easily be accessed. For business, for knowledge, we are always open. And it goes both ways, I'm sure. And most importantly, if you, and this is a pitch right now to everybody on the audience, because I'm the CEO of Masdar, and I would like to say that if you are thinking about opening an office in the United Arab Emirates, think about Masdar City. It is the best free zone to register your company in the United Arab Emirates.
Well, there you go, guys. One question I think perhaps to the former Prime Minister, when you think about this with regards to the future of policy, what do you anticipate we can see in terms of a conciliatory policy from governments going forward? Obviously, the UAE is throwing their full weight behind green energy initiatives and to make a level playing field and opportunities, as Mohammed was just saying, for everybody to come, set up shop, work together, find the potential for cross investment. But when you think about this with regards to Australia, for example, what do you see coming down the pike that could potentially lift the level of investment that we're seeing?
Well, the level of investment in renewable energy in Australia is very high. That has actually been despite the politics, not because of it, with a couple of exceptions. Obviously, the big Snowy Hydro project is a government project. Look, our politics has been bedeviled in the same way the United States has by the way in which climate change has been turned into an issue of belief or identity. And it's crackers, you know. Saying you believe or disbelieve in global warming is as sensible as saying you believe or disbelieve in gravity. And whereas in most parts of the world, the issue is being addressed rationally, in Australia and in the United States, it is still absolutely toxic politically. And people are, even though, you know, there is not one energy company in Australia that would build a new coal-fired power station, even though the banks won't lend to them, the insurance companies won't insure them. They're becoming increasingly uneconomic. You still have members of the Liberal and National parties, mostly the National Party, wanting the government to build coal-fired power stations. I mean, but you know, you had the same thing with Trump in the United States, Hadley. So, and David. So, it is, you know, this is to be honest, I've been waiting for years for rationality to dawn on this, but you know, you've only got to look at the fact that 3/4 of Republican voters in the United States believe that Donald Trump won the election to realize that in several Western democracies, rationality is in short supply.
David, does that concern you at all? I mean, in the sense of this is a matter of not just U.S. national security, but global security as well. I mean, we have the polar ice caps melting and conversations now happening in the Arctic about shipping rights and the movement of flags, I guess, if you will, across that area as well. I mean, is there a concern in your mind when it comes to the level of investment that people are willing to put in that politics could trump profit?
I think politics, you know, capital is coward, as they say, right? And I think the real danger is oscillation in the politics. And as the former Prime Minister mentioned, right, one of the real challenges, I think, when major countries like the United States or Australia, you know, vacillate from being supportive of renewable and sustainable forms of energy to, you know, not being supportive of renewable and sustainable forms of energy, that sends a mixed signal to the market. It makes it very hard to make the long-term capital investments that are required. So I think the real danger, right, is really just a lack of predictability that government introduces into the energy sector. You know, tragically, I think if we left it to the scientists and the capitalists, they could solve the problem. But unfortunately, I think frequently the politics get in the middle of it and muddy the water and then make it, you know, difficult to be confident in your investment. So I think that's a real problem. Hopefully, you know, with the U.S. returning to the Paris Accord and, you know, the change in the administration there, you know, we're at the dawning of the rationalization that the former Prime Minister mentioned, and that will carry forward in, you know, for a long enough period of time that we'll be able to start really making headway and that people can be confident in making investments in the space. The last thing I would say is I think also there was a lot of counterfactual information being put out by incumbent and legacy parties, within the hydrocarbon industry. And I think that, those parties have a big responsibility for the absence of what I say consensus view around the world. And we're going to, as unfortunately as a humanity, suffer the cost of those unhelpful sort of efforts and funding and think tanks that were out there muddying the waters for so long.
We have a question from the audience. One of the members of the council, Adrian Critchlow from Gray Innovation. Electrolyzers will need investment to get it to scale so that it can be economical. Are there specific companies across Australia or in the UAE who are investing in these promising technologies? Mohammed, can you weigh in on that one?
Maybe I can answer this question differently. Is Masdar investing, for example, in the electrolyzers technology? The answer is no. We are not investing in electrolyzers, and we will not be investing in electrolyzers. But will somebody from Abu Dhabi, be it Mubadala, be it other entities in Dubai, elsewhere, will invest in electrolyzers and electrolyzer technology? The answer is potentially yes. But Masdar will not. Masdar will be an implementer of these technologies. Okay. We will implement these technologies, we will integrate these technologies, and we will push to scale up the implementation of these technologies in a way that it is commercially viable, like we have done with solar technologies, with wind technologies, be it floating or fixed, and with storage with technology as well. So there will be a lot of, we have seen also a lot of interest from investors, private equity, big technology providers like Siemens, for example. They have their own technology, which is a subsidiary. They have invested in that company. And we have seen a lot of other players as well putting a lot of money in electrolyzers or hydrolyzers, as we call it at Masdar.
We also have another question. When you guys think about over the next 3 to 5 years, the key challenges to investing in this space, how can cross-country investment and cooperation help to overcome those challenges? I guess identifying them, we've identified some of them, but in terms of moving things to the next level, Malcolm, if you want to weigh in on that one.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, I think the critical thing is going to be leadership wherever possible, ensuring that there are not, political or regulatory barriers to investment. I mentioned earlier the issue of electrolyzers, and Mohammed's spoken about that as well. Look, I think there could be a role for some, perhaps some green hydrogen targets, in the same way we had renewable energy targets that were very useful in pulling through technology. I think that's certainly something to pay attention to and consider. And I think on the long duration storage front, I think that has to be given the highest priority consideration. There is, I should mention, particularly with respect to David, there is a joint commission between the International Hydropower Association and the US Department of Energy on long duration storage going on at the moment, and I'm co-chairing that. But this is a big issue that I think has been overlooked, and it could creep up on us. Well, it can creep up on you and create some big energy problems, as South Australia, Christopher's home state, found in 2016.
David, do you want to weigh in on there?
Well, I don't think I have much to add to the comments just made, although I do think the point that's being made that long-term storage is really important. If we're talking about green hydrogen and electrolyzers right now, one of the challenges are, as Mohammed mentioned earlier, they're expensive. The capex is quite high, and so you need to keep them operating 100% of the time in order to lower the cost of the product that comes from them. And that's a challenge with intermittent energy sources, so solar or wind. If you only have availability factor that's less than 50% a day, then the capex becomes double, as it were, in the cost of the hydrogen. So energy storage is one solution to that. I think the Emirates has an interesting solution as well in the form of nuclear power, which is a dispatchable, no carbon form of energy that can come in and sit behind renewable energy to provide, constant flow of, no carbon energy that could supply the fabrication or the production rather of green hydrogen. So I think that's a really interesting point he's making. I think there's probably, as we would say in America, more than one way to skin that cat, but we can do that ultimately, and it's required that we have a solution that has on-demand electricity from non-carbon sources all of the time in order to make green hydrogen, and electrolyzers or whatever technology ends up being in that space, ultimately economic.
Chris, I haven't asked you any of these questions, but I wanted to bring you in on these as well in terms of thinking about this a bit more broadly with regards. We talked about the challenges, but in terms of the opportunities for joint ventures, for that private equity kind of investment and working with sovereign wealth funds, where do you see that in terms of the potential for more deals between Australian companies and the UAE, whether it be private sector or public?
Well, Hadley, the discussion so far has been absolutely fascinating, and I think out of it, we've chosen the right subject for our first working group on renewables and alternative energies. And to Craig Valenzuela, I'd say the obvious answer is join the working group, become a key participant, and in 3 or 4 months' time, we are hoping that the working group will have a meaty proposal for how to do just that, how to find a joint project funded from both sides of the Indian Ocean with expertise drawn from both sides that solves a problem on both sides of the Indian Ocean. And I think given the strong relationship between the UAE and Australia, it's now been built up over a period of time, both in civil and military activities, I think that there's really prospects for us to be able to do that. So I would look forward to for people joining the working group and making it really, really hum.
Definitely, this is the best way to kickstart everything, and there will be, as you say, a working group to come. But in terms of just some closing remarks, we have a few minutes. I'd love to give the floor to the former Prime Minister if you have any some thoughts on what potentially could be the subject of the next group.
Well, the next group, I think I'd like you to continue with the renewable energy theme. I think we've got a terrific partner in Mazda in particular, and Mohammed's leadership there is so critical. Look, I think we should find some projects we can work on together. You've got one going already in terms of harnessing methane emissions from waste. But let's see if we can tackle some more of these green green technologies. What about making green steel? There's a good idea. Got making green hydrogen in the UAE with iron ore from Australia. There's a lot. Andrew Forrest is obviously very, very keen to participate in that. I mean, FFI would be a great partner, I think, in this area. They've got the great advantage, I think, apart from Andrew's enormous enthusiasm and considerable resources. It is a company with a strong engineering culture and capability, and that's very important in this field. So that's where I'd be looking.
Mohammed?
I mean, we are more than happy to develop more projects in Australia. We are more than happy to invest more in Australia. Our journey to Australia has been really fantastic. The right regulatory framework, the open market, the transparency, the support that we have received across different governments in Australia over the past, since I started going to Australia over the past 6 years, has been incredible. So we as Masdar, we are committed to Australia, and we would like to develop further in Australia. And of course, we welcome all the Australian companies to come and join us here also in the UAE and in the region. Our partners in Australia, Tribe Infrastructure, and us, we are based in Sydney. Our office is in Sydney, Australia. We also welcome anybody who can't join us here in the UAE. Potentially, we can help coordinate meetings with, you know, our partners and our employees back in Sydney, if that is easier. And we are open to suggestions and ideas. You know, we are keen, and we are growing, and we are growing fast, and we will definitely like to grow in Australia. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, I you know, as an American, Heather, you can appreciate this too. Of course, you know, my hat's off both to Australia and also to the UAE, who are making, you know, dramatic inroads into, you know, energy transition and changing their energy infrastructure. And I think that creates real opportunities. You know, the two countries should look for opportunities. They import and export different commodities and different components that are used in their various industries. And I think it, you know, be interesting as one party, you know, sort of creates a clean supply chain in a certain sector to turn that to the attention of the other country so that it can benefit from it as well, and vice versa. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for the existing trade, you know, and given the support for energy transition that you see in both locations, for that to really turn into interesting joint venture opportunities in the future, and products that both countries can point to as being clean exports.
I just wanted to say thank you all so much. Once again, Your Excellencies, David, it's been fantastic to moderate this session on the part of CNBC, and hopefully we'll get to continue these conversations going forward, because this is certainly right up our alley. I just wanted to say thank you all again. And in terms of if you are interested in joining the UAE Business Council, Australia UAE Business Council, you can get in touch with Casey Lamb, who is Executive Director. Thank you all very much, and hopefully see you guys next time at the working group.